Okay, Rabotai, we are on Dav Bet Amud Bet 2B2. Okay, the last thing we did was Ve'ema Betlesa. We ended off on Emmanuel's comment, right? If I'm not mistaken, Emmanuel, that was you, right? Well, what about the 13th? And the answer was Kishushan, that the other alternative besides for the unwalled alternative was the alternative of Shushan, and therefore that tells you that every walled city would have to fall into the other category, which was the 15th day. Okay. Ashkechan Asiyah. The Gemara says, so we have found already this concept of Asiyah, which means, has everyone found it?
You find the celebration, yeah?
Ashkechan Asiyah. Yeah, you got it?
Yes. Second
So
side.
the right column, middle, 2B2.
Yeah. Ashkechan Asiyah. The Gemara says, okay. So now we have found this concept of celebrating the Purim and all of the active elements of celebrating Purim, which means Mishloach Manot, which means Seudah, which means Matarot Levyonim, because the Pasuk explicitly mentions those when it mentions the days. But it does not mention reading the Megillah, Zechira Minalan. How do we know that the mentioning and the reminding ourselves of those days is also held on the same dates as 14th and 15th? Gemara says, Amakira, says the Pasuk, V'hayamim ha'ele niskarim v'na'asim, and these days are niskarim v'na'asim, are remembered and done. So it says that niskar and na'asa are done in the same breath, indicating that whatever day you do the celebration of the day is the day that you remember the celebration of the day. What's the remembrance of the celebration of Purim? The Megillah. So therefore, whatever day you're doing those other mitzvot is going to be the same day as Zechira. The Pasuk says it explicitly that those days of doing are the 14th and 15th. Okay. Gemara continues. Matnita deloki haitana. Our Mishnah must not be going according to this idea that the walls, we saw already that the time of the walls is set by the time of Yoshua. Titania. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha Omer. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha taught in the Braita. Krachem mukafim chomam imot Achashverosh korim b'chamisha azar. 15th day is the day that's set for any city that has a wall surrounding it from the time of Achashverosh. The Gemara says, what do you mean, Achashverosh? My tama, what's the reason? Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, why does he say that? The Gemara says, Kishushan. Now, once we just read that Gemara, so where do all walled cities, where are we learning all of them from? From Shushan, because the other versions are the ones that are unwalled. So we have unwalled and we have Shushan. Those are the two possible dates. So where are all walled cities learned from? Shushan. So therefore, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha says something which is highly logical, that the idea of a walled city should be based on comparison to Shushan. Just like Shushan, Ma Shushan mukefet chomam mimot Achashverosh, v'korim b'chamisha asar. Shushan was a city that was only surrounded by walls from the time of Achashverosh, and we read on the 15th, of course, mukefet chomam mimot Achashverosh, korim b'chamisha asar. Anything that's walled since the time of Achashverosh should also read on the 15th day of the month of Adar. The Gemara says, okay, hold on, v'tana didan, and our Tana, my ta'ama. Why would he explain that this has to do with the time of Yoshua? The Gemara says, Yalif Pirazi Pirazi. He learns a quasi Gzera Shava from Pirazi Pirazi. Why do I say the words quasi? Every time you find a Gzera Shava, you're usually learning from one pasuk to the next. Okay? So one pasuk in the Torah to another pasuk in the Torah. And by the way, you can't make up your own Gzera Shava. It's only one that was handed down from teacher to student all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu. So there would be a teaching as an example. It says by the Korban Olah like this. It says by the Korban Shlamim like this. Therefore, the halacha of Olah is also imported to the halacha of Shlamim. If you have to slaughter it like this, if you have to do like that, so therefore you also bring that to the... That's how a general Gzera Shava works. Gzera Shava means a word, Shava which is equal. So if I find the same word in two different places, and I have a Mesorah telling me that is an accepted Gzera Shava from Halakha Moshe Misinai, so we have a Gzera Shava. Over here, obviously that's not the case. How do we know that's not the case?
One's in the Megillah.
One's in the Megillah. Can't come from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay? So we're learning a Gzera Shava from Megillah, where it says the word Perazeh or Perazi, to the word Perazeh in the time of the Torah. Where does it say both? Ktiv hach, it says over here, Ken HaYehudim HaPirazim. Oh, it says over here that the Jews that were Pirazim, that were spread out in the unwalled towns. Uktiv hatam, and it says over there, when Yehoshua was conquering, take a look at the last, second to last in the inner column where we have the Pisukim. Kol ele arim b'tzurot choma. All these are cities that were fortified with a wall. Gvoha, tall, dilatayim ubariach, where they had a door and a lock. You know, in those old medieval films where they have the thing with the wall and with the big plank of wood. That's dilatayim ubariach. Then they lock it. Okay, so these were cities that had not only walls, but they had gates, and the gates had locks on them. That's how they were fortified. Levad me'areh haperazeh harbe me'od. Besides for the unwalled city that were many of them in the time of the conquering of Moshe and Yehoshua. So therefore, uktiv hatam levad me'areh perazeh harbe me'od. Ma lehalan, just like in the pasuk in the Torah, mimot Yehoshua ben Nun. So from the time of Yehoshua ben Nun, Afkan, also here, Mimot Yehoshua ben Nun, also here from the days of Yehoshua ben Nun. Ask me a question.
Shushan, Yehoshua ben Nun, not the same old cities.
Doesn't matter. That's what it's learning. It's learning out that when the Torah told you that those unwalled cities, it calls them Perazeh, so those were walled or unwalled from the time of Yehoshua. These are called Perazeh, so we assume that it requires the same timing for when they were walled from. That's the quasi Gzerah Shabbat that we're making. That's not the question.
Why Shushan at Perazim?
No. Think of the source of this pasuk. Where is this pasuk? Devarim Gimel.
One is from Naviim and one is from the Torah.
Good. So that's what we said. It's quasi. But there's something else we're missing here.
Were they in Eretz Yisrael yet?
Devarim Gimel. Could they have been in Eretz Israel?
No.
Why?
Moshe was alive.
Oh, so that means that from who, from which time should they have been walled if we're defining
Moshe.
it? From Moshe? Why do we say Yoshua?
Right. Maybe it's...
Now you think I'm being pedantic, don't you? So the commentators say, same thing. Moshe, Yehoshua, Moshe starts the conquest of Israel, but he really only fights the battles on the desert side.
Right.
With Sichon, with Og.
Right.
The rest of the battles, where do they take place?
Israel.
In Eretz Israel with Yehoshua.
Maybe they meant while he was alive.
Sorry, when who was alive?
Yehoshua.
So, but why does you mean from his time?
From his time.
But it should say from the time of Moshe.
I got it. But he went into Eretz Yisrael.
So the conquest of Yehoshua is Eretz Israel, correct?
Yeah.
Conquest of Moshe is where?
That's it.
Sinai.
Outside Israel.
No,
One of the reasons that we brought why we had this law, if you remember, of the walled cities, was so that the walled cities of Jerusalem should not be on a lower standard of Israel.
Right.
I mean, a lower standard than the walls of Chutz La'aretz. Moshe has no walled cities in Israel because he never steps foot in Israel. So therefore, if we're talking about walled cities, where the whole logic comes that there shouldn't be a disproportion to Israel, so it must be talking about the time of Yehoshua ben Nun. Why else is this important? Because somebody asked me a question right away. What about the city of Yericho?
Yes.
If we're going by the time of Moshe, it was walled from the time of Moshe. If you're going from the time of Yehoshua, it's unwalled from the time of Yehoshua. Because in the conquest is when it fell.
But it
So
was
that-
walled
It was
at the
walled.
time of Yehoshua.
It was walled in the time of
he
Yehoshua,
destroyed it.
but then he destroys it. So, but deciding how we're looking at this, is it from the time of Moshe or the time of Yehoshua? These are going to be, some of these fault lines are going to describe as and when we're going to figure if these places are considered walled or not.
I know we're already 3 classes in, and I asked this before.
Yeah.
Who cares about a walled city? I just don't understand what's the difference.
Okay, so just to review, the Pasuk explicitly says, therefore the cities that are unwalled read on the 14th day.
I know what it's.
Hold on,
But like, who
hold on,
cares?
hold on. And the city of Shushan reads on the 15th. That means that the Pasuk itself that commands us when to keep the Megillah and Purim, it differentiates not Shushan versus other cities. It differentiates between unwalled cities and Shushan, indicating in the Pasuk itself. So the obligation of Purim is divided along the lines of unwalled versus walled. We called it unwalled versus Shushan, But if you just meant Shushan versus other cities, you should have just said, therefore, all the cities read on this day. Shushan reads on that day. If the Pasuk went through the point of telling you that the unwalled cities read on 14th, that means that the Gezerah from the first place was that every walled city should read on one day and the unwalled on another day. Why?
Yeah, why?
The answer is because if you remember, the conquest happened differently in all those other cities versus the city of Shushan. In the city of Shushan,
13th and 14th.
that 13th and 14th. When do they rest and party? 15th day. So therefore, we celebrate on the day that they celebrated. In those other cities, they celebrate on the day that they celebrated. What day did they celebrate on? 14th. Now, if you remember, the Gemara asked one point, which should be your counterattack. There are other cities in Hodu ve'Ad Kush which are walled, which are not Shushan, which also did not have a day 15 resting place.
They did not have.
They did not have that. So why are you telling me unwalled versus walled? It should be cities versus Shushan. Versus Shushan. You get the point there just now?
Yeah.
So a walled city, which is not Shushan, what day did they rest and celebrate on? 14th, not 15th. So we should be celebrating just like them. The answer is that the Megillah itself expressed that there's only one outlier, and that is Shushan, because of its walled status. So we saw a reason already brought down in Mifarshim that in a walled city, they found it was easier to understand and to feel the miracle on that day. So you have multiple reasons to go on, right? Because they had a defense system. Okay? So you have multiple reasons to go, but the Pasuk tells you clearly what it wants you to do. So we could argue until we're blue in the face what the logic was, what the logic wasn't, but the Pasuk in the Megillah tells you unwalled versus walled.
Are there delineated other walled cities from the time of Yehoshua somewhere that, that tell us what those cities are?
Is there a list?
A list of other walled cities from the time of Yehoshua that we read the Megillah on the 15th.
Yes, there is a list, but it's not like a specialized list that people didn't make listicles back then. You didn't have BuzzFeed, right, where they just randomly produced lists of things. It would be information that we would have from other Pesukim that would tell us about the fact that city was had a wall. Like as an example, let's say the wall of Yericho did not fall. So we would know the Yericho, it talks about the wall.
So if the Megillah references Shushan,
Yeah.
and there are other walled cities near Shushan, why wouldn't they read on the 15th there also?
Because the miracle did not happen on the 15th.
The miracle happened on the 13th.
They did not rest on the 15th. They should really have celebrated in those cities on the 14th. But once that exclusion would have been Shushan higher than Jerusalem, so we changed it to be, which feature did we make it about? About the fact that it was walled. Now, in order to include Jerusalem, we changed Shushan to be about its walled status, so every other walled city had to change its halakha in order to make this change possible.
And
Can I give you an example of this? Just a simple example. How come the Leviim are not part of the slavery in Egypt?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
You learn something new every day.
I didn't know that either.
Fantastic. You know what Masechet that's in? No, it's not. I'm going to keep pulling that one out. The answer is never going to be Tani, by the way. Okay? We know this for sure. It says that the Leviim did not serve in the slavery in Egypt.
Were they there?
They were there. They were living there, but they were not enslaved. Not one person
Why?
from the tribe of Levi.
Wasn't Moshe and Aharon from Levi?
Yes, and they were not enslaved.
Were they the only two?
The whole tribe of Levi was not enslaved.
What do they
Sorry,
do?
what did you say?
They named them, all the elders of Levi.
It named the elders of Levi, but I was going to thought you were saying something else. That Levi, when they started going into descending into slavery, he named his children names of the slavery to indicate that he was also, even though he wasn't obligated to work, but he also Gershon, right? Kehat, Merari. All these are names associated with the tragedy of slavery, even though he himself was not part of it. Okay. Why was Levi not part of it? This is fascinating. If you turn back a couple parashiyot, Yosef, what does Yosef say? He says, you guys, you want food? No problem. You got to pay me. So they pay. Now they have no more money left. What do they say? Take our animals.
Right.
Takes the animals. Now they have no more animals. What do they say? We're going to starve to death. Take our land.
Right.
Take us as slaves, because if we don't have food, we're going to all die. Doesn't matter. So Yosef says, listen, everybody here, come. You're going to get a piece of paper. We're going to move you to some other piece of land in the land of Egypt. Okay? Paro now owns all the land in Egypt. He's giving you back the piece of land that he happens to say that you're going to live on now. You used to live in Deal, now you're going to live in Long Beach. Okay? You take 4/5 of the crop, you bring Paro 1/5 of the crop. Pasuk, you'll find it in the Pasuk, okay? In the end of Miketz. Okay, in the end of Vayigash, excuse me. Okay? Says the Pasuk something interesting. So everyone now works for Paro, everyone pays a 20% tax to Paro, and everyone is not on their own land. Milevad, says the Pasuk, except for the priests of the Egyptians, except for the clergy. There was an exception that the clergy were exempt from the tax to Paro. They ate for free.
No real estate taxes for.
Parsonage. Right there, biblical. Ready for this? The Chachamim say, why was that relevant? Why did Yosef do that? Why did God put that in his mind? What did Yosef care about the clergy? Was it Paro's decree? The answer is, so that when the Jews went into slavery, there would already be a law absolving clergy for working for the crown. So when it came time to subjugate the Jews, Levi did not go. Because they didn't go in the beginning, they didn't enslave them at all.
They didn't go where?
They didn't go to the work when they started the work in Egypt, and they said everyone has to come. Everyone went except for the tribe of Levi, because they were clergy. They were studying all day. They were the priests. Mm-hmm. So this law had to be enacted for the Egyptian Coptic Yani priests in order to save. Why did I bring you all that? The whole point of the walled item, instead of Shushan versus everything else, was so that the walled city in Jerusalem would not be on a lower level, right, than the walled city of Shushan. But in order for it to be about the wall,
You have to make it about Shushan.
you got to make it about every walled city. You understand? So every walled city, for the sake of Jerusalem, changes its day just so that Jerusalem cannot be embarrassed. And by the way, we find this idea many, many places, that the Torah was very careful. This is a very important lesson about the honor of Jerusalem. Yeah? The Gemara says that there were certain scholars that they never wanted to say, it's hot in Jerusalem. It's hot. It's uncomfortable. We don't have enough space. We're squished. Because that would be considered as if they were speaking badly about God's holy city, and they would get punished for it. So God is jealous that people should speak badly about his city. Yeah.
The reason why everyone else rested on the 14th is because why? They shipped out all the.
Because on the day of war to defend themselves was on the 13th.
Right. And
That was the decree for everybody.
There were just more people to kill in Shushan.
In Shushan, where everything was intrigue and diplomacy and court and all that kind of stuff, so not everything was clear. They killed very few people. First day, 500. Second day, 300. Everywhere else, they killed 75,000 in all the other countries. So it's not.
But wasn't Shushan giving the mass order?
Yes, Shushan is the origin source of all of this. But if you know anything about court intrigue, it's very hard sometimes to know who your enemies are. So they had to ask in Shushan for another day to weed out who those people were. And when they discovered who was part of this conspiracy and that conspiracy, they wound up killing the next day as well.
We asked the rabbi a question if Achashverosh gave Mordechai the taba'ah, the ring, and said, do whatever. Why couldn't he rescind the first order to kill all the Jews? Why'd they have to kill 75,000 people? Because the rabbi said, because you can't rescind the order of the king. So he gave him a different order that you could defend yourselves. So they had to fight it out.
And that I didn't make up. It's a pasuk in the Megillah. Because any decree that is written by the king and signed by the seal of the king, it cannot be returned. So the only way, after declaring that everyone's allowed to kill the Jews, the only thing they could do, they can't say, sketch, no killing Jews. They had to say, okay, still kill Jews, but Jews are allowed to kill you back.
Goes back to your point about Yosef making the decree about the priests. Paro could have easily said, no, the Levim have to be enslaved as well.
Exactly.
Precedent.
Exactly. There's precedent. And Paro, we already know, doesn't like undoing his decrees. He has a PTSD. The guy can't say yes; he can only say no. Okay, let's.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
clear?
Sorry
So
for
it's
that
really
side
not
note,
about
but thank you.
Shushan, it's about Yerushalayim.
Yes, it's about Shushan, but once there's this discrepancy, now we have to solve for that discrepancy. So all the walled cities come into that as well, and then we're back to Yoshua ben Nun. Okay, so the Gemara says, just like the walled cities in the pasuk describe Yoshua ben Nun, so the walled cities, or unwalled cities in this case, describe from the time period for ascertaining walled versus unwalled is the time of Yoshua ben Nun. The Gemara says, okay, hold up. Bishlama Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha lo maketana didan. I understand Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha does not learn like our Mishnah. He doesn't have this gzera shava, quasi gzera shava of perazeh. That unwalled cities in the Megillah is like unwalled cities in the Pasuk in Devarim. Ela Tana Didan, but our Mishnah, how come our rabbi didn't hold like him? What was the reason why he didn't agree with his logic that the Pasuk says Kishushan? The Gemara says, Maitama, I don't understand. Deha'itli perazi. The question doesn't make any sense. He holds of this Gzerah Shava, meaning that tells him that we decide the time based on Yoshua ben Nun. So now you're going to ask me, why doesn't he hold from the time of Achashverosh? Because he holds of the Gzerah Shava, which says from the time of Yoshua ben Nun. The Gemara says, no, let me explain. Hachikam, this is what I meant. Ela Shushan da'avda keman. Shushan is according to whom? Whose custom is the people of Shushan following? Okay? Lo keperazim velo kemukafim. Right? Because the city of Shushan itself, it doesn't make sense. Because the city of Shushan, was it walled from the time of Yoshua? No. So if the rule of walled is from the time of Yoshua, so then Shushan itself, which sets the precedent, doesn't follow its own precedent.
But doesn't it say in the Megillah?
Bomb question, huh? No, you're right, it says in the Megillah. We're learning that all these other things fit into the concept of Shushan. But Shushan itself doesn't fit into that concept. And that answers the Gemara that you're correct. Amar Rava v'Amar Chedi. Some people say it was Kedi. Some people say it was Rava who answered. Shani Shushan ho'il v'na'aseh ba nes. Shushan is different since a miracle was done in that special place because they had this extra day that was granted to them. Okay, so then they had an extra day. So then we decided that Shushan should be considered like all the other walled cities. Okay, and it was classified, if you will, in the highest status as the status of a walled city from the time of Yehoshua ben Nun. Okay, now the Gemara continues and says, okay, let's try and understand the other side. According to our Mishnah, that says that it's from the time of Yehoshua. Hainu dichtiv midina umdina, the ir va'ir. In the Megillah, it says, when it's talking about the time where everyone reads, turn to the pasuk in the little column, mispar number hey, the small pasuk in the middle column. V'hayamim ha'ele, in these days nizkarim menasim are remembered and done. B'chol dor v'dor, in every generation mishpacha in every family. Midina, every country, v'ir va'ir, in every city. Yemei ha'purim ha'ele, these days of Purim, lo ya'avru mitoch ha'yudim, should not pass from the Jews. V'zechram lo yasuf b'zram, and the remembrance should not dissipate from their descendants. So what are we saying over here? Now I understand. According to what our Tana in the Mishnah is telling you that there's walled cities from the time of Yoshua, walled cities from the time of Achashverosh. If you learn that it goes by Yoshua, so when the Megillah said Medina, each province, Ir va'ir, it needs to tell me on each one that there's two kinds of Medina and there's two kinds of Ir. Why Medina umdina? Medina umdina lechalek ben mukafim choma mimot Yoshua ben Nun lemukufot choma mimot Yoshua. So when it says that in every country and country they read the Megillah, it's describing two types of countries. That's why it says Medina umdina, right? Because there's two different kinds. One that's walled before, one that's walled after. Ir va'ir nami, Ir va'ir also city and city. It had to differentiate. Why? Lechalek ben Shushan l'shai arayarot. It had to differentiate between Shushan and other cities. Why? Because Shushan does not classify as a city that's walled from the time of Yoshua, and yet it's different than the other cities. So I understand why you have to say Medina umdina, because there's two different things. Ir va'ir, because there's two different things. El Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha. But according to Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha, that it goes by the time of Achashverosh. There's only two different types of things. You don't have four. Medina umdina lechalek ben lechalek mukafin choma mimot Achashverosh. That's telling you the difference between cities that are walled from time Achashverosh to ones that were not. The she'en mukafim. Okay? But however, ir va'ir, city and city, lemai ata, what is it coming to tell you? There is no other option. All there is are cities that are walled from time Achashverosh and non-cities that were walled from time Achashverosh, indicating that you don't need those two words, ir va'ir. So this proves the first opinion correct. Answers the Gemara, no. Amar lecha Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, blah, blah, blah. Amar lecha Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha. Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha will tell you, Uletana didan minicha, what, according to you, it's better? It's also difficult to understand. Kivan itle perazeh perazeh, since he holds of the Gzerah Shavah that we said earlier, that you learn an unwalled town to an unwalled town, that indicates and tells you that it's only a city which is walled or unwalled from the time of Yoshua ben Nun, Medina lamali. I didn't need you to differentiate using Medina, because you already differentiated using unwalled, perazeh, perazeh. Ela kra, therefore, the pasuk ledrashahu de'ata. The pasuk over here is coming to tell you a dirasha. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi hu de'ata. It's coming to tell you what Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi learns. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi learns. This was the question of one of the boys. I said we're going to come to it later. Kirach v'chol samuchlo, a walled city, and everything that's near the walled city, v'chol hanir'a imo, and everything that can be seen with it, nidon kekrach, is considered like the walled city. So therefore, what is it coming to tell you when it tells you Medina umdina? It's coming to tell you the city and this other city which is next to the city. Okay?
Can I
interject.
I didn't get everything.
Okay, which bit didn't you get?
Whatever. But I think I can get it. So
Just tell me which bit you didn't get. We'll
going
clarify.
Medina, Bina, Ir Va'ir. They were going into that to prove the walled and unwalled.
So-
Is that just another proof?
It sounds like they're being subjective. They're really trying to fish for
So let's put it this way. I have, the way it works is like this. I have words in the pasuk. I don't understand what I'm supposed to do with them. I know that they're there for a reason. I don't know why. So the first Gemara says, one second, according to me, it's great. You know why? Because there's four different options. A walled city from Yoshua, a walled city from Achashverosh. Then I have two different types of cities. Shushan, which is not walled from time Yoshua, and other cities. So each one of those words is necessary. But according to you, that there is no option of Yoshua, so all there is cities that were walled in time of Achashverosh, and everything else is an unwalled city. So there are only two options, and you have four different words indicating four options. So what? Obviously, from the pasuk, you're wrong. The Gemara says no. You also have this problem. Why? Since you learned it out from perazeh, I don't need Medina to tell me the law, because I know that from perazeh, which tells me that a city that's unwalled from the time that's walled from the time of Achashverosh doesn't cut the mustard. Okay, so I don't need Medina to tell it to you. So therefore, you also have the same problem as me. You got it?
Yeah.
And therefore, so what am I going to answer to you? Right? Yehoshua ben Korcha says, these are not coming to tell you the different status of cities. It's coming to tell you laws within the concept that we already know about unwalled 14, walled 15. And what is that concept? That even a walled city, how do we define the area surrounding a walled city? That also is connected to the walled city, so long as it's nir'ah ilav, so long as it's nir'ah imo, as it's seen together with it. Now, what does it mean that it's seen together with it? If you have a open area that's easily seen from the city, that's considered hanir'ah imo. You could see both the city inside the wall, and you could see the city outside the wall. Okay? 1 second.
1 mil. Amara Yirmiyah. No?
Yeah,
We're on the
it's
second.
Ad Kama is up until how far is how far do you include the city in the distance of I can see it from the city?
Sorry? Yes. Okay. We're going to get to this in a minute because we have to get to Daf Gimal Amud Bet to see exactly how we learn this law in its entirety. The area right outside the walled city, we're going to get there to see what the conditions are to be considered part of it or not. But that's not for now, okay? So the Gemara says, Kol hanida nir'ayim, if something is seen with that walled city, nidon kakrach. Now, says the Gemara, ad kama, how far, when you say near, how long is a piece of string? Okay? The Gemara answers, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah teaches, V'item Rabbi Chia bar Abba, and some people say in the name of Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Ki mechamtan leTiveria, from Chamtan to Tiveria. That's the distance. Mil is the distance of one mil, which is not the same as a mile. It's a halachic measurement of space. Okay? Now, ask the Gemara on this exact thing. Velema mil. Why don't you just tell me mil? You got to tell me from Long Branch to Wayside, 6.2 miles. Tell me 6.2 miles.
Notice all your geographic references all go back to
Jersey.
Jersey.
Yeah, that's where you got country road, take me home. Okay, fine. Ha-kamashmalan. That's the only daf shiur you're ever going to have that song in. Okay. It says the Gemara, ha-kamashmalan, the shiura demil kamahavi. Genius. You already know how long a meal is. Where do you know how far that is? From this halakha, which told you, meal, that's how you know that the amount of space a meal is 2,000 amot. Brilliant, okay? This is the historic geographic precedent. Okay. Now the Gemara, we're going to go through another concept of Rabbi Yirmiyah v'item Rabbi Chia bar Abba. By the way, you should just know, this fellow Rabbi Yirmiyah is a bit of a pedant. In fact, in another Gemara, Masechet, wrong, in another Gemara, Masechet Bava Metzia, the Gemara brings a whole bunch of questions of Rabbi Yirmiyah. The type of questions that kid asks that everyone rolls their eyes. Like if it's this far, but what if he has 1 foot on this side, 1 foot? That guy. He was that guy in Bet Midrash. Until they got so annoyed, they threw him out of the Bet Midrash. But he was pedantic. He wanted to know exactly the halakha. So it fits that he's measuring 1 meal. They ask, how do you know? And he's like, what do you mean? This is how you know it from. Okay? Let's continue. Similar idea. Rabbi Yirmiyah says in the name, and some people say it was Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Man tzafach tzofim amarum. What does man tzafach tzofim amarum mean? Man tzafach is the final letters that you have in the Hebrew language. You know that? So mem has a mem sofit, right? The regular mem looks like this with the yud on the top. A mem is that basically a square. Nun has a bottom. A nun sofit is just a long leg. Okay, so each one that has a nun sofit, a sofit letter when it comes at the end of a word, man tzafach tzofim amarum. The prophets indicated them. Tzofim literally means those who see. The seers told us that these letters need to be written in a different way. Says the Gemara, V'tizbira, does that make sense? V'aktiv, the pasuk says, Ele ha-mitzvot, these are the mitzvot, she'en navi rashai lechadesh davar me'ata. A navi, a prophet, is not allowed to make up any halacha after the time of Ele ha-mitzvot, of the time of the Torah. Okay? So how could they institute new letters later on in time? Doesn't Rav Chizda say to us, Mem v'samach shebeluchot, the mem and the samach in the luchot, benes hayu omedim, they were standing by a miracle. What does that mean? Take a look. Let's say you have a mem like this, and it's carved through and through the stone from one side to the other. You have a mem like this, no problem. Why? Because the stone is here, the shape of the letter is engraved here, but the inside of the stone is what makes the shape of the letter, right? So that's what holds the letter. No, on a regular mem. Yeah. On a mem sofit, it's a square. Samach is basically the same, just rounded at the bottom. So how in the world, if you scrape it from side to side, then the inner part of the letter has nothing to hold it in the air. Right. So what do you have if it's a mem? Just a hole. Right. What do you have if it's a samach? Just a hole. That's not a mem and that's not a samach. Right. So says Rav Chizda, in the luchot where you have a mem sofit and you have a samach, they stood there, they were elevated in the luchot by a miracle. So this basically the piece of rock was suspended there by a miracle. Obviously before Moshe Rabbeinu destroyed it. Okay? The second luchot didn't have this. that wasn't
I don't-
carved in the same way.
I didn't understand what you said until I just read one.
Okay?
So the letters of the luchot were carved all the way through.
Through and through.
I didn't know that.
I said that.
I didn't hear you.
I think you were reading one when I was saying it.
I had no idea
what do
what
you
we
mean they
were
were
talking about
carved?
either.
Yeah.
Okay, so luchot are a slab of stone. Now imagine if you just
Is that what
scratch.
you came down with?
Yes, if
Okay.
you scratch the letter into the stone, no problem. You just scratch the letter in, whatever shape it is, doesn't make a difference. But if you're carving it through and through, so then any letter that is completely enclosed, the whole middle of the letter is now suspended in midair. Because you've carved it through the whole stone. So how do you have the middle of the mem, which will then make the thin outer layer of a mem? If it's not connected.
Not a mem sofit.
Right.
Mem sofit, right?
You
No.
can have a circle.
In a thing of water.
You can't have a circle. Why not?
A circle or a square, doesn't matter. Anything which is completely around,
Nothing in the middle of the
the only two letters in the Hebrew alphabet that are completely enclosed are the letters Mem, Sofit, and Samech. So the Gemara here is proving
wouldn't be able to say.
that wait, you just told me Mansapach was made by the prophets, but we have Rav Chizda who told us that the letters Mem and Samach in the Luchot were a miracle. If the letter Mem in the Luchot was not from the prophets, it was before the prophets. If it was a regular Mem, it's not a miracle. It's only a miracle if it's a Mem Sofit, which means that already in the Luchot, before you have any prophets, it's already a Mem Sofit. So we're proving from the words of Rav Chizda that all the Sofits could not have come from the Sofim, from the Nevi'im.
What happened in the second Luchot that it would not?
It wasn't carved by the finger of God. No, it was also Sofit. But the second
it was
Luchot,
straight, not
Moshe
straight.
Rabbeinu, Pesod Lecha, Shnei Luchot Avanim Rishonim. Okay? The first ones were Etzba Elokim. They were done by the finger of
So
God.
they had to remain, the middle sections
Yeah.
remained in place through a miracle.
In the first Luchot. Okay? The Gemara says, yes, that's true, 100%. You had both of these at the time of what's it called? Of the Luchot. Mehave havu. Ve'lo havu yeda'eh, but they did not know, hey ba'emtza teva, ve'hei besof teva. They did not know. They knew that all these forms of letters already existed. But they had two letters that indicated mem. One looked like the regular mem, one looked like the square, and they just knew that both of these were mems. But they hadn't yet indicated that one of them was for the end of the word and one of them was for the middle. Is that clear? So who clarified which form to use when? They declared that the ones that are open, that have an opening, be'emtza teva, are in the middle of the word, ustumin, and those that are closed all the way around, besof teva. Ask the Gemara, hold on, sof, end of the day, what did we ask earlier? Ele ha-mitzvot, she'en navi atid lechadesh davar me'ata, that a navi is not allowed to institute something after this point. So how could you say that the Nevi'im decided that this is how you do it? They can't do that either.
Just explain it. They didn't have to decide. It was already
No,
decided.
but they needed to say that one is in the middle, one's at the end.
But it was already decided. They just gave the Rashi on it.
But so again, remember, we have one thing saying that they tikkunum, they were instituted it. Right? Okay. Ela, that's the Gemara, exactly what you just said. Ela shechachum v'chazru v'yizdum. They forgot it. They forgot the law that had already been given, and then they came back v'yizdum and they instituted it again. We're going to see in just a second this idea.
Can you just please bring this full circle? Where did this come from?
I see what you did there.
It's a different item.
Sorry.
It's a different item.
It's its own idea and concept out of nowhere.
Yes, all that it shares in common is the person who said it,
Yirmiyah.
Rabbi Yirmiyah. Okay?
Okay.
Once we brought something from Rabbi Yirmiyah, we went to sidetrack to Rabbi Yirmiyah, and now we're done with that. Now the Gemara continues with Rabbi Yirmiyah, and this is going to be our last Rabbi Yirmiyah.
So this has nothing to do with Purim or Megillah.
Zero. Except for one thing.
Wait, maybe it does.
Except for one thing. And I always love this. The Gemara said that Mantzapach Tzofim Yizdu Tiknum. That the Chachamim, they instituted the final letters of these letters, Mem, Nun, Tzadi, Pei, Chaf. The Gemara says can't be. A Navi is not allowed to bring anything new into it. Nothing, zero. The Gemara says, no. We already had the letters. All the Navi said was, use this one over here and use this one over here. What's the Gemara's follow-up question to that?
The Navi's not supposed to
Do that.
No, do that.
Answer the Gemara. They didn't do that either.
They forgot it.
Hold on one second. Let's hit pause.
Like Navi forgot.
Let's hit pause and recognize that this right here, this line, that question is the source of orthodoxy versus reform and conservative.
Start over then. 'Cause
Huh?
I lost you.
The Gemara
You
says.
hooked him with the finish.
The-
You should have started.
I should have finished
mystical
with
at
the.
top
Ready for this?
there.
One more time.
Yeah.
The Gemara says, the prophets instituted mansapach. Yes, the Gemara. What do you mean? Navi's not allowed to introduce anything new. Answers the Gemara. You're right, 100%. God forbid, I would never say that. It already existed, both letters. Just the Nevi'im came and they told us that the ones in the middle, that's the one that's used, the regular mem in the middle of the word, mem sofit at the end. So they told us where to put these two forms. The Gemara says, but they're not allowed to do that. They can't institute anything new. The Gemara says, oh, you're right. What it means is that was the halakha. We forgot the halakha, and they just reminded us that was the halakha. You see from here that the Navi is not allowed to introduce anything. Anything. Zero. You can't bring in other. You can't even tell me if there's two letters. Use this one here, use that one there.
Okay.
Because the Gemara held that for a question. The only thing they were allowed to do is, if it was already a halakha and we forgot it, they could remind us of the halakha.
Why did the Navi come after?
The Navi comes after.
Okay.
So how
I
does that
understand now. I didn't
how does
know.
that
You
form
got-
the basis of
we
the
were
difference
talking
between
about.
Oh, the basis of the difference between orthodoxy and conservative reform is that conservative reform says, what do you mean? All of Torah is decided by the people. We get to decide what, when, where, how, what the people could hold, what the people can't hold. Should they open the parking lot on Shabbat, etc., 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 etc. The people, and they think, why can't the rabbis just? If I had $1, if every time I heard that, why can't the rabbis just? You know what I want to show them? You know why? Because the rabbis can't do anything. I can't even tell you where to put the stupid mem, the middle of the word or the end of the word. The only thing I can do is tell you that this is how it used to be. That is what it means to be a shomer Torah mitzvot, that you keep it exactly as it was. And you could or can't measure up, and that's okay. No one is saying that everybody's have to measure up. There's not a single person, the Gemara says, En tzaddik ba'aretz asher lo yechta. You're not going to have a single tzaddik that's never going to make a mistake. People can make mistakes. But the law is immutable. It's unchangeable. I don't care what kind of prophet you are, how big your bet din is. It makes zero difference. You can't introduce even where to put the mem.
But isn't the Torah interpretive?
Absolutely
You have
not.
1,000 different opinions?
Absolutely not.
Really?
Let's explain. What does it mean that they're having different interpretations? Their interpretations are in what does this mean? When the Torah said this, how do we understand what this meant? But for me to come along and institute something new, there's not a single instance of that. Now, Megillah is a whole new thing.
Yeah, like Mordechai.
The Torah doesn't say that in Megillah. How did the Navi do that? The answer is, there's no illusion. There's no illusion that this mitzvah is a mitzvah from the Torah. The Chachamim can make gezerot. Chachamim can pass rules within to protect the Torah, etc. But for them to change, why can't so hard with getting divorced? Why can't the rabbis change the law of the get? Shema Israel. I said, I could do that, but then I couldn't be a rabbi. I couldn't be an Orthodox rabbi. You got me?
So they come up with loopholes to get around the law.
No.
Like having the guy sign a prenup with the get.
No. That prenup with the get is the biggest, it's not even worth the paper it's written on.
Really?
Zero. Means absolutely nothing. So let me explain. I had to explain this many, many, many times. If you sign, people think you could, Rabbi, I want the pre-get, they call it. The pre-get is the funniest thing to me in the world. You know why? Let's say I wrote an let's say someone wrote an actual get for their wife. Okay? And then they live together with their wife. You know what happens to the get?
Comes forward.
Void.
Void.
You obviously,
Void ab initio.
zero. It means nothing. So forget a pre-get. You're pre-getting, and then you're getting married and living together. That even if it was a get, it's not a get. There's no such thing.
Can't you give a get on a future?
You can't give a get on a condition. There's no such
not a
thing.
condition, but can't you say in a certain amount of time this is good? If I die right before you die, then it works or something like
A
that.
person could give a get on a time base. That's not a condition. That's a timing. But that's not this
But
case.
even then,
with
it's
the
not
wife
the
in
time because
between.
you don't know if it's
Exactly. Okay?
With his wife.
There's other examples where the Gemara tells us, by the way, that they used to do that in the time of David HaMelech. They would go to war and they were nervous they'd get killed, washed away in a river. Their wives could never get remarried. So what did they all do? Before they went to war, everybody divorced their wives. They came back, they remarried their wives. That way, if God forbid they didn't come back, their wife would be free to marry and they wouldn't have a problem of aguna. What a beautiful thing it is when the army is doing things ka'alaka. By the way, that's one of the understandings, the simple, straightforward understandings about David and Bathsheba. He married a woman that was divorced. Her husband, Uriah HaKliti, went to battle. It doesn't make a difference if he died or didn't die. She's now a divorced woman. He married a woman that was kosher
we take
for him
advantage
to
right
marry.
away. You kissed, you send me to the front line, we're good. Let's go.
One more time. Whether or not he should have sent him or he shouldn't have sent him, a different question.
No, that wasn't my question.
But the question of whether Bathsheba was an Eshet Ish,
Right. That's got it.
right? Okay, let's move on.
Rabbi, I hate to be the guy that gets thrown out of the Beit Midrash, but how do we know that they forgot it and they remembered it? If they forgot it, how do we know that was even a thing?
So the Gemara is actually going to give another example of Shechachum v'Chazurum. Okay, do we have time to do this? I think we're out of time now.
5 minutes.
We'll
Okay.
continue next time.
Yeah. I think we'll continue next time. We are on 3A1, Rabotai. Set your markers.